How's it going, Midnight Gamers? I decided to make this video to kind of explain how Midnight Gamer started, the YouTube of course, and the page that it's based off of that I admin for. Just kind of like a little history on that, and then I think after that I would like to go into my own gaming history. Just kind of, what I started with, the first consoles that I was playing, and just, just kind of the memories based around that. I'm not gonna lie, I've been watching a lot of CGQ, Classic Gaming Quarterly, and I kind of took the influence from that. As far as that, he runs a page that he does really awesome. He does really awesome launch videos. He did one for the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, the TurboGrafx, and I believe the Super Nintendo one really got him really big. They're really in depth. They're real fun to watch. And I think based on that, he started another page called CGQ Plus, which I think is kind of more personal, because he just kind of sits there and he does a ton of videos on explaining his history in gaming and where it started, and kind of about his life during that time and stuff. And he spread this through probably about 20 videos. I'm not gonna do that. I don't write that well. So I'm going to do kind of a brief version of that. So I will put links in the description for his CGQ and CGQ Plus page if you would like to check that out, because it is really neat. It's pretty cool. So basically, Midnight Gamer. Well, Tom Van Tol, he's the creator of the Facebook page Midnight Gamer, and he came to Bill and I, William Crook on the page, and we kind of had our own thing going on that was on YouTube called Classic Kickback, and I think we did about 5 episodes or something like that. And he really liked that name. He's like, hey, I'm trying to make like a gaming Facebook type thing, and is it cool if I use that for the name? Well, we were like, well, no, not really. We're trying to do our own thing, with the Classic Kickback. So, let's fast forward, a few weeks after that. Tom ends up making his own thing, and he calls it Midnight Gamer, and instantly added Jack, Bill, and I to the page as admins from the get-go. And so I'm like, oh, this is cool, little page, something that I can at least post, the Classic Kickbacks, episodes too, and, hopefully get people in the groove. So we had us as admins, and I think about a month went by, and I completely forgot about the group, and I decided to check up on the page, and it had like 10 10 members, and there was just nothing going on, and like I felt so damn bad that I think, within that next week, I was adding people, and I built it up from like 20 to like 100 in a matter of like a week's span, just because I felt so bad that I wanted to bring this up. And since then it just kind of blew up into this really weird thing. I started adding a lot of my friends. I made a couple people admins, of Joshua, also Ian, just old friends of mine, something, some that I thought would bring a contribution to the group. People were posting and doing stuff, and I thought that was really neat, and I decided, I should do a little more, like a little something extra. So I'm like, well, they got this little live thing that you can do on Facebook. So I thought, well, you know what, I'll just do a little shitty live stream and start going live with my games on the page, just for fun, And for some reason, people just started really liking my streams, and I was the only person doing it at the time. And sure enough, after about a month or so, other people are starting to stream, whether it's YouTube or whatever form that you're using, also as well as people doing the Facebook Live. And a lot of people ask me, they're like, well, I kind of want to do this, but I don't have the right equipment and all that stuff. And I'm like, guys, I'm literally using a shitty cell phone with a makeshift tripod. It's literally like a busted fan bottom with a selfie stick jammed into the top. I'm like, guys, anybody can do this. Rig it up and do it. and it just started blowing up. Everybody started streaming. I mean, it was such a good feeling. Around that time, I think we were at about 200 members, and I can awesomely say that I think we're creeping up on 750. Last I checked, it was 720 something, and we just keep getting more and more members each day. I think it's really fucking cool. So yeah, that's kind of how the Midnight Gamer came about. And of course, after doing so many live streams, I mean, I've had to have done, I couldn't even tell you how many live streams I've done. And after watching it, people liking these, and I'm liking them myself, I'm like, I need a way to archive these, because I always want them to be there. Something that I can rewatch, or throw on a playlist, or just like, hey, I did this, or I beat this game, or remember this, that type of deal. So I started archiving a few videos on the lovely Jack Nicholson's YouTube page. That's my girlfriend. She's also an admin of the group. I'll also post a link in the description to her YouTube. Anyway, so that's kind of how I started archiving my videos. And after a while, it just got to a point to where Josh had made a web page for it, and I was just like, I need to step up. I need to do something. Instead of trying to archive these on my girlfriend's YouTube and taking up all her content, I just need to make my own damn Midnight Gamer YouTube. And since then, I've been posting past live streams that we're pulling off of the Facebook, mine and hers so far. We've been making episodes of Midnight Gamer News that people seem to be really liking. I think we're up to episode 3 at this point, not including the pilot episode. Yeah. Oh, and then we started a series called Midnight Gamer Play, where it's just pretty much me and like anybody, whether it's Jack and I or Joey, who's on the news as well. We've just been kind of doing better quality playthroughs that we wouldn't be able to do with live stream. Now, not that much better of a quality, but it's definitely noticeable. So yeah, there you have it. That's how Midnight Gamer just kind of came about. So I guess now I'm going to jump into my personal history with gaming. So I guess I'm going to start off here with how I got started into gaming itself. And it's funny because I never really, I had little bits and pieces, throughout my childhood that I always remember. But I really had to sit down and think about just kind of like, everybody I met and what was, in fact, my earliest gaming experience. And the earliest that I can kind of draw this back to, I think I was about 6 years old. And my mom was dating this real jerk. His name was Scott. He was a big military guy. Well, so anyways, aside from Scott, Scott had an original NES. And being 6 years old, I guess I really didn't think or know too much about video games, but I do distinctly remember Scott letting me play his NES. And it's funny because most kids, especially around that time, they were like, "Oh, I played the NES." It was always like Super Mario Brothers, or it was Duck Hunt, or something like that. And my first introduction game, at least to my memory, was Ninja Gaiden on the NES. And I remember playing it and just being blown away by the music, and it helped that I really loved ninjas when I was a young kid. So I kind of think that was kind of the draw that really brought me into that. And quite honestly, that's the only game I can remember playing when Scott was around. But then again, I was 6 years old, so it's kind of shocking that I even remember that really. I guess we're going to fast forward to about 1994. I was about 7 years old at the time. And I think that was the point when I first got like my actual console. I got the Sega Genesis, and it was mine. It was all mine. I remember it wasn't like something, that I opened up at Christmas or got on my birthday. I just remember telling my mom that I wanted a Sega Genesis and I wanted Sonic 2. That was the big game that was kind of out at the time. And back then, I live in a town called Mesa, and downtown Mesa is kind of, I wouldn't say it's run down now, but it's not what it used to be. And when I was a kid, downtown Mesa had, they had a theater, and it just a slew of like really cool pawn shops. I'm not sure they were that cool, but I remember them being very cool because they were just stuffed with just I was about to say classic gaming, but at that time it wasn't classic gaming. These games were, 3 to 4 years old at the time, but, old enough to be, at pawn shops for a really cheap price. And I remember going in and my mom buying me a Sega Genesis with Sonic 2. And that was my first console. That was all mine. That's what I had owned. I do vaguely remember a Christmas in between then and meeting pretty much my first gaming friend. My family in the mid 90s or so, the 90s were great for us. My grandma owned a restaurant. My grandpa was a truck driver. And so like our Christmases and our birthdays were awesome. I mean, maybe a little too awesome. We were spoiled brats. What can I say? Me and my two cousins at the time were just spoiled brats. And I remember my grandma asking me to make a list for what I wanted for Christmas. And I think as a kid I always kind of tried to like push the envelope. And so I just started writing down like a bunch of stuff. Just like in my head, I'm like, she's not gonna get all this shit. This is crazy. Hopefully she'll look at this and she'll be like, ha ha, you're not getting the half of this. But one of the things that I did do is I wrote down 2 consoles that I wanted that year, which is absurd to ask for. Sometimes even one's crazy to ask for. But I asked for a Super Nintendo, and then I asked for a Sega Game Gear. It was Sega's little handheld console that came out after the Nintendo Game Boy, and its draw was it was full color. You know what I mean? Granted, it took 6 damn AA batteries, and if you were lucky, you got about 2 hours out of it. So I remember as a kid always being plugged into the damn wall with this thing, playing my games, because batteries for it were just ridiculous. Anyways, so I remember my cousins kind of doing the same thing. I believe my cousin Josh wrote down, a Super Nintendo and a Genesis. Ha ha ha, here's my list of games. And I'll be damned if we were opening up presents that year and I got everything that was on the list. I couldn't believe it. I had 2 consoles sitting right, and my cousins, same thing. Just gifts sitting around them. And my cousin used to be a little brat when we were kids, maybe a little spoiled. I'm like, thank you for like everything. And I remember him sitting there with all these games and stuff around him, and he starts crying, and he's like, "Is this it?" And I was like, "Man, come on, dude, look what you got here." But yeah, aside from that, that was kind of a vague memory I have that year. But soon after that, we had moved into a new neighborhood, and up the road, I had a friend, Bobby. Kind of a weird kid, but all kids are weird. But he was kind of one of those guys that like was a weird kid and then just got way weirder as an adult. And I remember meeting him because he was the only other kid on the block that had a Sega Genesis as well. So we both had our Segas, and I'd bring games over that he didn't have, or he'd come over and bring games that I didn't have. He got me into wrestling, and I think that kind of became like a weekly thing. It was always like Monday Night Raw. I'd come over to his house, we'd play some Genesis until Raw came on, and then we'd watch Raw and we'd be all into it, and then we'd eat dinner, and then I'd go home or something to that extent. Also around this time, like I said, this probably would have been about 96, is when I started hanging out with Bobby. And his family had just gotten a Nintendo 64, so it was probably later, 96. And I was blown away by it. And I think what really blew my mind was I think it was WWF SmackDown or something that they had for it, and I had never seen graphics like that in my entire life. So I was always kind of jealous. Bobby lived up the road, and it was like the family console, so it's not like I could play it all the time. But luckily for me, I ended up meeting a new friend around that time that lived right next door to me. His name's JJ. He became a friend of Bobby's, and he had a Nintendo 64 as well. He had the one I remember him having was GoldenEye 007, and I would just sit there for hours and watch him play this. His house was kind of weird. He had a sickly mother, but like in like a creepy way. You don't like see these things when you're a kid, but now that I think back on it, I'm pretty sure she was a drug addict. She was just really, really odd and gone. But yeah, so around that time, and I had not yet gotten into the PlayStation 1. I knew about it, but as it was then, my neighbor had a 64, and that was good enough. I think in the next year here, I think about 1998, Bobby ended up moving out of the trailer park that we had lived in, and oddly enough, a new kid moved in right into the same trailer that Bobby had just moved out of, and his name was Brandon. And Brandon was he was a couple of years older than me. I think I was probably about 11 at the time, and Brandon was like 13 or something like that. Like he was already, in junior high, and I kind of looked up to him, and he kind of, had me as like his little protege or whatever you wanted to call it. But Brandon had a PlayStation 1, and I went over there, and it just blew my mind even further. Brandon, I think the two games that he liked to play at those times was Colony Wars, which is kind of like a space shooter thing. But the graphics at the time was just like, as a kid watching this, I'm like, oh, we're playing a fucking movie here, I mean, that's what's going on. So Colony War, I didn't really get too much into that. But Brandon also loved Tomb Raider, and he introduced me to Tomb Raider, and just the way that he talked about Tomb Raider and stuff, like, I mean, it was cool. I was 11 years old. I was impressionable. So I hung out with Brandon for, a couple of years, and, moves happen, I think he ended up moving to Queen Creek, which is a few towns the other way. It's about a 30-minute drive, and it was just kind of tough to hang out, so Brandon and I didn't really start hanging out anymore. Let's jump to 1999. I think I was about 12 years old, and I remember the Dreamcast coming out, and I hadn't owned one quite yet, but I remember being at Target, I believe, and at the time they used to have they'd have like the console in like a black case or whatever, and you'd have the controller sticking out, and you would be able to demo some games. And always being a big Sega fanboy when I was growing up, not only was I looking forward to the console, but I was really looking forward to what they were going to do with the Sonic series. I remember playing the preview of Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast and lost my goddamn mind. I mean, it was seeing Sonic in a completely different light, and I had to have it. I'm not sure when the console was released, but I think it was either my birthday or Christmas. Parents got me a Sega Dreamcast, and they got me Sonic Adventure and the first Soul Calibur game that was released on it. And I think they got me that because I was a huge fan of the Soul Blade series on the PS1. I did end up getting a PS1 in between this. I probably should have said that. But yeah, in between me and Brandon, I ended up buying the PS1 and just really digging the Crash Bandicoot games and stuff. So out of the Dreamcast. So I had those two games, and it's funny, I had such a low attention span at that age that I remember having the Dreamcast. I remember playing like a bunch of Sonic and Soul Calibur, but I think that's as far as I went with it. I started getting a little older. I started kind of caring more about like teen stuff. Even when the PS2 came out, with the PS2 release date was like 2000. Okay, so like the next year later, I ended up getting a PS2, and I think my mentality was that, oh, cool, this thing plays DVDs, so I have more room on my little, entertainment center that I can just take my CD player out, DVD player out, and I got something that plays games, DVDs, and CDs. I was thinking of it more in that way, and I did have a few games for it. I played a little bit of Final Fantasy X, and just some really random games, Grand Theft Auto 3, San Andreas. But it wasn't until probably a year or two later that I met up with a kid named Graydon. And Graydon was really big into Dance Dance Revolution. And I believe I even owned a copy of Dance Dance Revolution Extreme at the time. And I just kind of, I didn't really play it, blah, blah, blah. But he ended up taking me out to, we have a place out here called Golfland, Golfland Sunsplash. And in the center of it, it's this big castle. And inside the castle is just arcade games. 2 floors of it. A pizza, anything a teenager would want. And I remember it was either Thursdays or Fridays. You would go in and you pay like $8, and for like the next 2 or 3 hours, all the games were free. Like you could go up, it was just free play. And his thing was DDR, and we'd always line up at the DDR thing, and just start getting into DDR. I was getting pretty decent, and I ended up playing it at home on the controller, which I still do till this day. It's a pretty fun game. So the sad part is after that, the later part of my teenage years, I kind of dropped out of gaming. I was more concentrating on skateboarding and like hanging out with my friends and getting stoned and stuff. So as a result of that, after I moved out, I ended up selling so much of my games, so much of my anime. I was a big anime nerd. Graydon kind of pushed that whole envelope, and I kind of gravitated less from gaming and more to like anime, skateboarding, and all that good stuff. Then when I was about 22 years old, I was, dating an ex-girlfriend at the time, and I ended up moving out to Washington State, just kind of unfamiliar territory. But what kind of resurged my interest in gaming at the time is that I was in a little town called Yakima, and Yakima is just like this little city with 2-lane roads all the way through. It's the epitome of a small town. But you go to downtown Yakima, and they had 2 pawn shops. Well, one was like a pawn shop. And the other one was kind of like a bookstore, collectibles store. I think it was like the Golden Coin or something like that. And going into that coin store, they had a slew of NES and Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games in the glass case. And at that time, it wasn't so vocalized what some of these games are worth. You're talking maybe about 2008, and they had Super Nintendo games that were in there that were worth at least fucking $50, and they were priced at $5. Every single game in there was priced at $5. So what I started doing was I just started stocking up on these games. At that pawn shop, I ended up buying a Sega Saturn for I think $30. It was a really, really cool experience. Fast forward back a few months, I ended up moving back to Arizona with all these games. I was broke on hard times, and I sold them all off again, which I could really kick myself for now, because me collecting for the Saturn is very pricey, and some of the games that I paid like $15 for in 2008 are like $50 to $100 games now, and just becoming more and more and more rare. So where are we now? I'd say that was about 2008, and I didn't start getting back into gaming and game collecting until this past year or so. The wonderful Jack, my lady, has been in college this whole time, but she started doing night classes. So there was a couple days out of the week or whatever that she would be home late, and she was like, you need a hobby, you need something to do, you don't have to rely on me, for something to do all the time. So, I started watching, more game shows and all that stuff, and I'm like, oh, I want to get back into collecting. And it's definitely this harder. It's definitely harder this time around, but you know, still living the dream. I guess that's really all that I have to say. Like I said, CGQ kind of did a similar thing, and I got his link and Jack Nicholson's links to their YouTubes in the description below. Let me know what you think of this video, and thanks, guys.